Hello everybody and welcome back to the Fortress of Solitude. Today we're going to be talking about Star Wars: A Legacy of Vader Issue 2 by Charles Soule, Luke Ross and Nolan Woodward. Kylo Ren continues his journey through his grandfather's past, having recruited help from Vanny, Vader's old servant, who leads the young tyrant to Tatooine's sand-swept streets. As we've come to see from Kylo, he is extremely arrogant and self-righteous, and therefore he can't really see the point in coming to a place that both his uncle and grandfather fought very hard to get away from. Vanny reveals that this is where everything that made Anakin Skywalker who he was as Darth Vader happened. Where he met his future wife, where he was recruited by the Jedi, where his mother died, every single thing that has defined his path begun on that planet, and it's also where he found true power within the dark side. Kylo also learns how Vanny found out such things about Vader, having stolen Palpatine's security codes after his death so he could access his meticulously collected files on Vader, learn more about his master and what struggles he went through during his life. Vanny is such a strange character because we've seen him in the films and he was in Kenobi and he's just kind of there in the background, and I love that it's the comics and the books are giving him this kind of rich backstory where he's just like so utterly devoted to Vader. He'll do anything for Vader. Even after death, he is still serving his master, and he's even transformed his body so he can keep continuing to serve his master long after he should have died himself. It's a really fun character, and I'm intrigued to see what's actually going to happen with him after this series, since obviously we don't see him in any of the other films or anything like that, so who knows what Charles Soule has in store for this character. Vanny takes Kylo on a tour of some of the places around Mos Espa, starting with the Pod Racer Arena, where Anakin's name adorns the Wall of Winners. What's interesting is Charles Soule reveals certain things Kylo didn't know about his grandfather, almost like his family were hiding them from him, like the fact that Anakin and his mother were slaves, and when he joined the Jedi Order, Anakin was freed but his mother was not. That is something that I have always had a problem with, like, why couldn't Qui-Gon free his mother? I get the whole attachments thing with the Jedi and everything, but it just seems like such a shitty situation to leave a woman in, like, oh, we'll just leave her in, you know, slave labor for the rest of her days, which will eventually end up to her being kidnapped by Tuskens and whatnot. That was something I didn't particularly like about the prequels, and I understand why it was done to, you know, free him from attachments and whatnot, but it just made things worse. It kind of compounded over time. And I like we get to see Kylo kind of coming to that realization as well and realizing, oh yeah, of course the Jedi Order of that time didn't do that. Of course they didn't free this woman from slavery because it didn't, you know, give them something they wanted. And I like the fact that he is really bitter about that, about his grandfather's mother not being freed. Vanny can tell he is angry and further fuels it by revealing that Vader's entire life was unending toil and sadness, which he rose above so he could achieve greatness as Darth Vader. He asks the boy if his life was similar, and I love what Soule does here, as Kylo is blind to the fact that his hatred is not born from loss or grief, much like how Anakin's was. In fact, he doesn't really have any of that, as we actually get to see him kind of go back through his memories to, you know, check if they are any, you know, anger or rage or toil or sadness, and we get to see his life was just full of love and family and comfort. You know, he was there always with his family, and it really fits in really well with what we've seen of Ren in the films. His anger and fear are more just because it's like angst, that kind of age he's at. He's trying to make himself and others believe that he is something more than he actually is. You know, he's trying to live up to the greatness of Darth Vader, but he can't, and that makes him very arrogant and rage-fueled, and that's where his rage comes from. Not the fact that he had a loving family and there was no tragedy really there until we see in The Last Jedi Luke's mistake. But then also by that point, he was also being manipulated by Snoke or Palpatine. So I think it's very cool that Soule is actually making it known that no, Kylo didn't have like this troubled childhood that he seems to think he has. He had a very loving family, and it was all Snoke and Palpatine's doing that corrupted him to thinking that was not the case. One thing though that does still irk me is that why did no one in the years leading up to all of this, did no one in his family mention that yes, his grandfather was Darth Vader, and then by the end of it he had become Anakin again, he overthrew the Emperor, he became the Chosen One again, he fulfilled the prophecy and brought balance to the Force by killing Palpatine, and no one mentioned to him that he turned back to the light after that. They failed to mention that. I don't really understand what was going on there, because obviously Kylo got all of the wrong influence from his grandfather through this. To be fair though, again, this is all Palpatine meddling, and really Sol is trying to make the best of it. I said this in my last review, he's trying to like bolt together things, and the movies really kind of ruined that. Well, I wouldn't say ruined, but like made that much more harder, because they said obviously Snoke had been Palpatine and Palpatine was sort of like controlling it all, and that kind of is like an answer for everything almost, which is a real shame because it doesn't leave writers room to really wiggle in terms of what things happened and what things didn't happen. As Kylo and Vanny talk, they are accosted by 3 thugs who, while knowing the legend of Anakin Skywalker, don't really care for who he is or who Kylo is, wanting his credits. Kylo has no time for these little men and he kills them with the Force, making them turn their own blasters on each other. He does leave one thug alive as he carves Anakin's name from the leaderboard, demanding the thug tell him who was the one who owned Anakin Skywalker. Kylo's interrogation of the thug leads him to Watto's old workshop, which has long since been abandoned. Kylo immediately thinks that his grandfather sought revenge on Watto and killed him, but Vanny knows that that's not what happened at all, since Vader was too busy to deal with someone so small like Watto. Besides, Watto was not Anakin's only owner, as the boy and his mother were owned by Gardalla the Hutt before Watto. Leaving Watto's fate uncertain is quite a surprise, as I'm sure most of the internet saw those preview pages that came out that showed Vader killing Watto, although we now know that was just Kylo imagining what his grandfather was doing. And I like that now we have the full context. I kind of like that scene because it's Kylo kind of bigging up his grandfather and who he was, and kind of like, yeah, he killed Watto because that's something I would have done, or something he assumes his grandfather would have done, but it's not really something Vader, or the Vader we've come to see throughout these comics, would have done. He would have just left Watto to kill himself eventually, and succumb to his fate. He probably would have like done something to him if their paths had actually directly crossed at some point, but I don't think he would have just gone out of his way to try and kill Watto. Like he really didn't like setting foot on Tatooine anymore, and he honestly didn't, I don't believe. I think there was maybe an issue he did, and it's something that he did not like at all. Also, the focus shifting to Gardalla the Hutt, a character we very rarely have seen, and they are in the background of some stuff in Phantom Menace, the pod racer stuff, but apart from that, we've never really had a story centered around them. And centering it around a Hutt, especially set in this era of the timeline, of the Star Wars timeline, feels very much like the Legends expanded universe, where quite a number of times the Skywalkers or the Solos or their adjacent friends and other characters would tangle with the Hutts who are seeking revenge over Jabba's death, or the Hutt cartels are after revenge against the rebels or something, a la Darksaber. So I like that this kind of gives this book this kind of Legends air, where like the Skywalker Solo clan are fighting the Hutts again. That's really cool. Kylo vows to erase the Hutt from existence, heading into the dunes to find Gardalla's fortress. Vanny surprisingly contacts Gardalla, telling them that Kylo is coming for him. I like that he's still playing that game where you kind of got to get one up on the guy in front of you. You know, very much like what we'd see a lot of the Empire do, where they're always backstabbing one another. And this feels like very much like a Sith thing as well. Like Vanny has seen Vader do to countless apprentices, Inquisitors, and all that sort of stuff, where he pits them against each other, or betrays them to someone. And I like that he's doing this to Kylo, and I have to think that there's probably going to be like a teachable moment there, like if he gets caught, there's going to be like, I was only testing you, or sort of thing. Or again, kind of that whole blanket thing of Palpatine is behind it all. Maybe Palpatine is telling Vanny to like guide Kylo around these places or something. Kylo soon arrives at Gardalla's fortress, easily killing the Hutt's 2 Rancor guards before carving his way into the fortress with his lightsaber. Inside, Kylo confronts the very smug Hutt, who isn't concerned concerned at all about Kylo's threats for revenge. Gardella orders the men to kill Kylo, and the Supreme Leader slaughters the guards, and this is where the book takes a really cool twist, as Kylo has his lightsaber yanked away from him by this weird little homunculus monster thing who says that his control over the Force is weak. The being Force pushes Kylo back, and it's revealed that Gardella got this little monster thing as a precaution after what happened to Jabba with Luke Skywalker. As Kylo is knocked unconscious, Gardella tells Kylo a pretty important thing. Past is not that easy to kill, and now he is bound to repeat his grandfather's story as Kylo is strung up in Gardella's dungeon as his new slave. So this little monster homunculus guy is very interesting and something I didn't expect to see here. And if I had to throw out a theory, I would assume this monster is like a Snoke clone thing. We know that Snoke is a clone, so maybe this is like an earlier version of a Snoke clone that Palpatine has made and placed out in the galaxy with Gardella, knowing full well Kylo would go after him, and as we know, thanks to Rise of Skywalker, Palpatine's behind it all. As I said before, Soul is trying to retroactively make a not so good story a little better with some added character development. There's some rough edges that have revealed themselves this issue, especially with like the Skywalkers and Solos not telling Ben Solo about his grandfather and not really telling him the whole story, more or less. And that could have solved a lot of problems. Again, it's kind of the past repeating itself, where had, the Jedi back then freed Anakin's mother, maybe some certain things maybe wouldn't have happened. But I do like that Soul is trying to make an effort to make it all work. I am excited if he continues to build up this Snoke-Palpatine-Kylo relationship we saw bits of in his first series, The Rise of Kylo Ren, since the overall idea of Palpatine pulling the strings and kind of trying to make up for Vader in a way and not fully revealing himself is quite fun, but it's hugely underdeveloped and we need a lot more to make it a bit more compelling. Legacy of Vader 2 took Kylo to his roots on Tatooine, exploring Anakin's time on the planet and how his misery and despair built him into the man who would become Darth Vader. I love how Soul contrasted that with Kylo's largely peaceful, loving childhood and is developing the angsty, moody Kylo we saw in the films into a much more complicated character. With the conclusion of a mysterious Force wielder and exploring more of the Hutt cartels, I can't wait to see where Charles Soule takes Kylo Ren from here. I'm going to give this issue an 8 out of 10.